1, 2, 3, 4.
See this picture. Can you see it loud and clearly? Do you know what this is? This is two cowboys, or better, it's two gauchos in the Pampa de Argentina. Actually, I'm one of those cowboys, of those gauchos. And this guy, I'm learning how to get a gaucho. Because yesterday we had a wonderful asado, and I got taught how to get a real gaucho, like how to ride horses and put the saddle on the back, and how to wear cowboy hats, and how to drink, and how to eat a lot of meat. And there was also meat, and a little bit of meat, and ribs. And I think I also had a chorizo, which is sausage, and meat. And when I got up this morning, I came up with a conclusion. So, do you know what the difference is between Germans and Argentinians? I mean, not that we speak German and you guys speak Spanish. Do you know what's the difference? The difference is if in Germany, when I eat meat, I feel guilty. You guys feel guilty when you're vegetarians. Is that true? Look at this. This is a vegetarian schnitzel. Horrible stuff. So we were at that wonderful asado, and there was beers, and Leandro, he was always sneaking around me, like giving me beers, and meat and beers, and more beers, and it was always Leandro, and I was about what's going on here? Beers, and a little bit of sausages. And suddenly, I knew there was something happening, but I got drunk, so I didn't care. And suddenly he came up to me with his beautiful eyes. He took my hand like, "Hey, Nick, sorry, can you help us out? There's a speaker bailed off, and can you give the closing talk tomorrow?" And I was drunk, and I said, like, "Yes, of course, no problem." And he still held my hand, and I thought, what a wonderful guy, but this is an evil guy. Because he abused me. I was drunk. He made me say yes. And the problem is not that I have to talk on a Friday night. I love talking on a Friday night. The problem is that a closing talk on a Friday night should be like abstract and shouldn't contain too much code. My talk is full of code, and I hope you guys are ready for it. Are you ready for some code? Yes. I said, are you ready? Yes. So I want you guys to take a look at this picture. A long look. It's a train in Argentina. Oh my God, I got some enemies already. From the first point of view, this is a wonderful thing, because this thing transports people from point A to point B. What are you doing? You are guilty. So this train brings people from point A to point B. It might be very well air conditioned, because especially from the rooftop, and yeah, that's awesome. But the problem with this train is it might be very slow, because it's overloaded, I guess, and also if there is a problem, if the train has to stop, because let's say the air conditioning in the first class rooms is not working anymore, it will take hours until the service guys gets into the train, because there's too many people on it. And if there is, let's say, a cow, because you guys have a lot of cows in Argentina, if there's a cow on the track, this guy will break his wonderful leg, and broken legs are not good. And I see this train. I mean, do you see the analogy? Rails, a train, and a lot of people. So let's come to a concrete example. We have an active record class, and then we do stuff in this class. So it's our model, we call it. And then we have an after save hook, and this hook sends SMS notifications. So let's say it informs me, hey, you're a new user, thanks for registering, or whatever. And this is pretty handy. I mean, I know all you guys did that kind of stuff, but this is what I want. In my controller, I call save on that model, and it will automatically and magically send that notifications to this user. Now, in the next day, or maybe a week later, I write a migration, and I call save. And what happens if I run that migration? A lot of people are grinning because I know you guys had that problem. So suddenly, I just want to save some data. I just want to update this thing, and suddenly people get emails like, "Hey, thanks for registering," and they're like, "What the fuck?" And the funny thing is that happened to me like 5 days ago, and I gave this talk 5 times, and I'm always like, "This is bullshit," and then it happened to me myself. So what I mean is this hook, the after save hook, this is just an example of, it's a wonderful thing, but it can get in your way. And the problem in Rails is that we have like a little bit of a tunnel view. Again, the tracks and rail and train, come on, it's cool. And there's we have a lot of best practices and stuff like, hold on, best practices. So it's a couple of people who tell us how to write software, and this is cool. I mean, we can get things up really fast. But the thing is, a lot of these best practices can get in our way, and what I see is usually that you get, in Rails, big controllers and huge models. Hola, chica. And fat views. That is when you search on image search on Google and you search for big views, you get this. Do you have this problem in your projects? Because I have it. And I'm not giving this talk because I want to like bash Rails and this is shit. When I came here on the plane, I watched a horrible movie called Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. It is a ridiculous movie about Abraham Lincoln hunting vampires in the Civil War, and the southern states use vampires, and he is like the hunter and stuff. And in some scene, he chops a tree with an axe in one stroke, and his friend, he says like, power doesn't come from hate, it comes from truth. And the truth is, the truth is, a lot of people have these kind of problems in their Rails projects. So I'm not bashing Rails because I hate it. I love Rails. It gives me a lot of opportunities to travel all over the world, watch great movies on the airplane, and meet fantastic people. The problem is, that a lot of people complain about too big controllers, in manageable views, and huge models. And we already hit that. The biggest problem is this fat model, skinny controller pattern that is one of our best practices, in my opinion. Yeah. So, if this is my user model or my user class, why do you laugh? If this is my user class, each of those persons might be a feature like a hook or a whatever, a notification, validation, whatever. So they are all tightly coupled. They have to hold their hands not to fall down off the train. So what if we came up with something more like this? So we can still get from point A to point B. We need less metal and steel and stuff. We just need some air pumps. And it's pretty safe. Everyone's wearing a helmet. So groups can take shortcuts if they want, so we don't have to go as one big thing. We can go independently into different directions. And so what I want to say with those bicycles, and I'm not sure if this analogy was good, is if you have complexity in your software projects, and we all have that. We all have that. The best is to cut down complexity into smaller problems, because it's easier to solve smaller problems. And smaller problems usually means to have more classes, because right now we push everything into the controller and everything into the model. And also into the view, but it's not a class. So this is a sickness, in my opinion, in Rails. And I call it the fear of the class. Do you know this guy? It's my best friend, Drogos from Poland. I need a lot of water today, because your beer is different. I always wanted to be like this, but I can't afford the tie and stuff, so I still work like this. So let's talk a little bit about the data layer, and then a little bit about the view, and then a little bit about how to make your controllers in Rails more object-oriented, how to include more classes, just to make it a little bit better manageable. And the first step is to divide or to separate your domain, your business logic, from your persistence layer. And as an example, I use the two gauchos you saw earlier. Actually, they are called different now. They have different names now. I fucked it up. The scenery is a campfire in the Pampa de Argentina. By the way, I speak Spanish, but today, no, I don't feel like it. So, campfire, two gauchos talking. One is asking, "Want some drink, Steve?" The other one is saying, "Oh, yes." That is our problem we are solving with our software. It's pretty straightforward, I know. Gesundheit. So, in order to solve that problem, I use Poro. What is Poro? Plain old Ruby object. I didn't say porno. So, the workflow for this problem would be I instantiate two cowboys. Then I call the same method on one cowboy, passing in the question. And I get back a question object, and I call the respond method on the other one. In Germany, we have way better tape. Next time, I'll bring you guys 2 rolls. Okay, so to solve that, I used an open struct. Open struct is a special thing in Ruby. So if you derive a class from open struct, you get a constructor for free, and it will create accessors for every key value pair I pass into the constructor. Like in this case, name. So to ask that question, want some drink, Steve? I have to implement the same method. So I use the cowboy class. And I implement the same method. It just receives the string, and then I create a message object, and then I push that message object on a chat stack. So the details are not important here. To answer, I need to do the response method. So I do a response object, pass in the response text and the question object. I push it on my chat stack. The message is just an open struct. Response is derived from message. So I'm still using Ruby, just Ruby, to implement my problem, or to solve my problem. I know you guys were already thinking about like tables and a message table and which fields and foreign key. I'm not thinking in database level at all. I'm thinking in my problem, and my problem is solved using classes. So to run these classes, let's write a test. I mean, I instantiated chat array. And then I instantiate Jim and Steve, the cowboys, and pass in the chat object. And then I call say and respond in the manner we just discussed. In the end, if I access chat and I call toReadable, it will say 2 cowboys were sitting at a campfire. Jim said, "You want some drink, Steve?" Whereas Steve, who was already loaded as shit, responded, "Oh yes." And both were happy till the end of their days. By the way, Steve, I'm referring to you. And I have been doing this the last 5 talks, and you never said anything. Cool thing is about this, my problem is solved with plain Ruby. Test will run in about 5, I don't know, nanosecond? No, bullshit, whatever, milliseconds. It's fast. Faster than running Active Record and stuff. So I implemented my domain, my problem, with plain old Ruby objects. So what about the persistence, if I want to save those cowboys and stuff? And there's different approaches. One of those approaches is using the new Data Mapper 2, which is not available. But the thing is, I had an idea how to make objects persistent without touching the plain old Ruby object. So as an example, we have the message object, and we can include Data Mapper resource, the module, and then we can define fields that should be persistent. And Data Mapper will take care of saving that stuff to database and whatever. And I had the idea to make that a module. So you can push, you don't have to include it in the class, you can push it in the message object instance at runtime. The thing is, I had this idea, and the Data Mapper 2 author, Piotr Salnika, a very good guy from Poland, again, we have like a brain connection. Every time I have a good idea, he codes it. The same is with Steve Gladnick. We have the same thing, a little bit different. Every time I have a shitty idea, he codes it. So I just pushed this data mapper module into that instance, which is a plain old Ruby object, and I can access database fields without worrying about where that comes from. So this is one technique, and the only technique we are going to discuss today, how to make your plain old Ruby objects persistent. So we have the whole problem, the whole business logic in these Ruby objects, and the persistence is in a completely different layer. And Data Mapper 2 will take care of fiddling those things together, wrapping it in an object, so we don't have to worry about the persistence. This is beautiful, and this is why I love the Ruby community. People do drink with each other. We kiss each other without being, you know. This is great. Congratulations to Florian for accepting the challenge and almost beating me, because we had the competition who was dancing with a Argentinian girl first. It took him about 18 hours and 34. Hey, I was a little bit faster, just seconds. I mean, it's okay. Okay, so enough bashing. Let's talk about the view. Let's say I want to implement a sidebar. I mean, that's a common problem in Rails. The upper box is showing the recent messages from our chat, from the campfire chat, sorry. And the lower box is showing the participation quote, like Steve is obviously talking more than Jim, because Steve likes to talk a lot. And usually you use a partial. I would love to walk over there, but maybe I can do it. You see, it works. Yeah, sexy time. So I render a partial to implement that sidebar, and the partial would look like you have a simple HAML. You can also use whatever ERB, and I would just render the list of chat messages. That's the recent messages box, and the second box I would use a helper like a pie chart for, and then I pass in the chat object, and it will automatically render that pie chart. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. And this will give us this beautiful, wonderful sidebar with rounded corners. That is trendy, okay? Let's say I want to replace the lower box with a new feature, which is, I call it the happiness indicator. So this box will scan through all the messages from the campfire chat, look for words like beer and, I don't know, Argentina, chicas, and then it will compute a happiness count and will display it. So this is now we have two sidebars, and I want to have that pie chart thing. I want to use it in 3 controllers, and that happiness box I want to use it in 1 or 2 other controllers. So usually in your partial you would do like let's first render the recent messages box, and then if we are in the pie chart controller, render the pie chart. If we are in another controller, render the happiness thing with the percentage. So if else in your view. You all do that, I know it. Sound like a horse, right? So I use a view component to solve that problem. There's an awesome gem written by a fantastic, intelligent, smart, attractive, dynamic, I think he's from Germany already, yeah? It's called cells. So I'm using the cells gem to write a view component to solve that problem that we have 2 different sidebars and we don't want to re-implement, we don't want to copy and paste. So the controller just grabs the chat messages. And instead of calling the render partial, I call render cell. And I pass some configuration, and then I pass in the chat object. And the sidebar cell looks almost like a controller. So we derive it from cell rails. Then we have a show action. The show action receives the chat object. And we can do instance variables and stuff. And then I call render. Render will render the app cells sidebar show view. So it's almost like a controller, but sitting in app cells. That's separated and isolated. I love isolation, but only in software development. And the view is still the same. I just copied the partial into the cells directory for now. So if we look at that two sidebars we generate with this partial, with this cell, I can identify a common part. Oh, this guy is tired. We are almost done. So we have a common part, the recent messages, and we have a dynamic part, which is either the pie chart or the happiness indicator, okay? And usually when you want to replace just a small part in your code, you use a technique called overriding in object orientation. Here's an example. I have a message, and I want to override this behavior. I don't want to have the string in upper. I want to have the string in, let's say, lowercase. So what you do, you extract this to a separate method. It's called the format method, and then you override this method in the derived class. So I derive better message from message, and I just override format. Extracting, moving to a new method, overriding. That's a pattern everyone should know. And I'm sure you guys do, because Argentinians are awesome and smart. Slime, slime. Cool. How do you call it when you had alcohol and then you get very thirsty in the next day? What, 5 minutes? You talking? Okay, let's hurry up. So I use view inheritance to fix that, to override just a part of my view. So view inheritance in Rails works by so when I render a partial called item in the mummy controller, it will look for views mummy item. If I derive a controller from mummy child controller, and I render the same partial, it will look for view child's item, and if it can't find that, it will look for view mummy item. So that is view inheritance in Rails. It's absolutely useless. In cells, it is perfect because we can override just the single lower box in our sidebar. So here's the cell, here's our view, and let's refactor that partial. So instead of calling that if pie chart else happiness chart, I just render a new view. So I'm extracting that part I want to override to a separate view, and I call this view lower box. And the lower box view in the sidebar cell just renders the pie chart. And now what I do is I create a new cell. I derive it from sidebar cell. It's an empty cell. And I just dump a new view in app cells funny sidebar. So it's a new view directory, the lower box, and I put in the happiness chart. And by so when I call render cell sidebar, I get my sidebar with the recent messages and the pie chart. If I call render cell funny sidebar, I get recent messages and the happiness indicator. And all that just works by overriding the cell class and using, you have an empty class and you just override the view. So this is view inheritance. It's pretty handy if you have complex views and you want to get rid of deciders and stuff. So check it out, it's on GitHub, but not now. So let's see controllers. So usually controllers, you aggregate data, you hook into a route, then you aggregate data, and then you render it. There's a very cool gem. It's not useful in every occasion, but it's called Objectify. It hooks into the Rails routing, so I can say, let's say messages show. If you hit that route, call Objectify. So what it does, instead of having everything in one class, you have 3 different classes. So the first class, which is called, is a policy class, which checks if the request is valid and if we can run this action. So it's like a before filter. And then the next class is a service class. It does the actual logic, getting data for the chat or whatever. And the third class is a responder. This class is rendering the response. So we have 3 different classes to handle the same concerns as the Rails controller does in one class. And you might think this is over-engineering, we don't need that. But in a lot of occasions, it is pretty handy because you get rid of the before filters, the coupling, and you can do pretty free rendering, and you have your business logic in clean, testable classes. So it's a pretty interesting gem. The second example for controllers is how to write APIs. So usually the API for our chat, for our Campfire, would be listing messages, watching message details, or sending messages. That's like a common behavior we all need. And is he sleeping? Wait, I have a laser pointer. It's a green laser pointer because it was an expensive presenter, 70 bucks, euros. Okay, so let's see. In an API, the central notion, the central concept is a document, like a JSON document, and every API needs to render those documents, and every backend needs to parse those incoming documents if somebody wants to change state. And in Rails, this is done. I won't say anything. Use nails. So, Rails. No, no, come on. In Rails, this works. This works by the rendering part works by using sjson and then exclude a 5-level deep hash, or you use active model serializer or JBuilder or whatever. So all this stuff is basically template engines, nothing more. On the incoming stuff, the parsing of documents is automatically done in the parent hash, or now we have that strong parameters thing which decides if it's okay to use an incoming document parameter or not and stuff. So the problem here is that the rendering and the parsing logic is spread over the entire framework. So the knowledge about our documents, about the semantics and syntax, is spread over the entire Rails thing. I came up with a pattern, no, not me, some guy from Germany came up with the representative pattern. Actually, the logo was done by Nicolas Barrera from Uruguay. I still love it, baby. Some applause, come on guys, come on. Stop it, we are out of time. The representer does rendering and parsing in one module. So let's check this document, this JSON document. It's just an example. In order to render that or to parse it, I just create a representer, put in some ground base module, and then I create the defined properties of my object. And I can also use the link method to generate hypermedia. And I just call the extend method on my message model instance. I just push in the message representer module. And then this gives me 2JSON. So 2JSON is no longer from Rails, but from the representer. So it knows how to query and how to render this JSON document. And the cool thing is I can also use it to parse stuff. So I create a new message object, and then I extend it again with the representer, and this also gives me from JSON. So the representer knows how to render and how to parse. And when I call content, it's the field from the JSON document. So the representer mixes into the model and gives it strong abilities. And it just uses the accessors, like the reader methods and the writer methods, and no magic included. So it just knows, okay, I parse this document, and then I call, for each property, I call the setter. And you can do like nesting, you can have complex, deeply nested representations. You can have collections and lists of stuff, so representers are really powerful. Are we done? Yeah, we're done. I'm done. I'm done. So you can use I have 2 more minutes. That's perfect. So you can also use XML to render XML documents. We have the same semantics, but we just use XML, and we get XML. We have YAML and stuff included in the representers, and we can use it easily in Rails. So there's helper methods for using it in the controller. I don't go into detail because I just have 2 minutes left. And it also helps you parsing incoming documents using the consume method. By the way, I'm going to consume a lot tonight. And the stuff is on GitHub. I just showed you like 4 different techniques how to cut problems into smaller pieces, like cells with view inheritance, plain old Ruby objects for your business logic, Objectify to cut down your controller workflows into smaller classes, and what was the 4th? Write the representer pattern to make to handle documents, REST documents or whatever. And the last thing I want to tell you for tonight and for the next 6 weeks is, if you have problems in your software, if you lose track of what's happening because your classes are getting too big, do not fear to introduce new classes that solve specific problems. It's nothing wrong. There's no Java, and you're not getting into Java, you're not over-engineering. This is just something we have been misapprehended the last 5 to 6 to 7 years. So Feel free to use as many classes as you want, but don't overuse it. I'm on Twitter. On Twitter, you can find my blog. On my blog, you can find my GitHub. On my GitHub, you can find my email address. And if you're smart, you can even figure out my Skype name, and we can be friends forever. Thank you. No questions, because tengo que pisar. See you tonight at the party, right? Yeah. Yo.